Let's speak now to Brad Bowman, who's Senior Director of the Centre on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defence and Democracies. Thank you so much for being here live on BBC News. How serious would you say the rupture in relations is between Biden and Netanyahu? You have Biden saying multiple times it would be a mistake to go into Rafah. Netanyahu not only ignoring that, apparently, but not even telling Washington what the date he has in mind.
Thanks for the opportunity to join you. There's been two things going on for several months now. One is, I'd say, escalating political pressure from the Biden administration toward Prime Minister Netanyahu, even as U.S. weapons have continued to flow to Israel following the worst single-day attack on Jews since the Holocaust. And there's no doubt that that political pressure from Washington escalated significantly over the weekend, and President Biden's most recent comments are among the most acute. It is certainly true that there are dire humanitarian needs in Gaza. It's also true that Israel has enabled significant flows of food, water, and medicine into Gaza, but it's not nearly enough. And I think that the more Israel can facilitate that, the more time they will have to go after Hamas, who started all of this, of course, on October 7th with that terror attack.
Yes. What does it tell you, though, that Netanyahu, he was supposed to have given Washington his plan for Rafah? That still doesn't seem to have happened. And you then ended up with that press conference yesterday with Antony Blinken and David Cameron talking openly about having to make contingencies, plan Bs, for what would actually happen if that ground offensive actually happened. What do you make of a scenario like that, with the US supposed to be the principal ally?
The United States is the principal ally for Israel, and maintaining that relationship, I think, is an existential matter for the state of Israel. You're right. The tension is most acute regarding Rafah. I mean, you have a good portion of the remaining Hamas combat power that is residing in tunnels under Rafah, and right above them are 1.2, 1.4 million Palestinian civilians. So there's different ways to address that. The Israelis are saying we can't leave them there to conduct another October 7th on a day and time of their choosing. And so there's talk about a Philadelphia corridor, where the Israelis, at a minimum, prevent them from replenishing their arms and then conduct periodic strikes. But in the meantime, I think a temporary ceasefire is probably where we're headed, hopefully, that will release more hostages, get more humanitarian assistance in, allow Israeli forces to refit, and then enable, at some point in the future, Israel to go in and get the remaining Hamas combat power in that area while minimizing civilian casualties.
Let me ask you a separate question on Ukraine, principally, because David Cameron is there in Washington. He's having a variety of meetings on Capitol Hill. We know he's already met Donald Trump. He was there with Antony Blinken yesterday. Much more alignment with the Biden administration, perhaps, than Republicans. What sort of reception is he getting from Republicans? Because he hasn't met, for example, the House Speaker, and that is the key to unblocking the blockage.
Yes, indeed. You know, it's notable that he met with former President Trump. He's having all the meetings you'd expect in Washington, but all eyes are on Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson. He's the primary reason why we've had aid for Ukraine lingering for so long, with such horrible consequences on the battlefield in Ukraine. And Speaker Johnson is looking at four audiences. He's looking at his Republican caucus overall. He's looking at the MAGA element of his Republican caucus. He's listening to what Donald Trump is saying, and he's looking at his constituents in Louisiana. So they're trying to cobble together some sort of formula now that allows him to do right by Ukraine and pursue U.S. policy there that is in the American national interest without losing his speakership. And that's easier said than done when he enjoys such a thin, razor-thin margin in terms of his Republican majority. So they're looking at things like LNG exports and things like that that would now enable him to retain his speakership and get that Ukraine aid passed.
Sure. A brief final thought then. Is there anything that David Cameron can actually do to impact significantly that dynamic you've just described?
I think it's important for him to highlight what Europeans are doing to help Ukraine, because there's a perception among some folks on the far right in this country that a lot of Europeans aren't carrying their fair share of the security burden and they're free riders on us. And so the more he can highlight what Britain is doing and other European allies are doing to help Ukraine, so that to undercut that false narrative, I think would be helpful while he's in Washington.
Well, we have to leave it there. But Brad Bowman, thank you so much for joining us live here on today's show. Thank you.